To be honest, I thought Strand sucked, but this hunter build single-handedly proved me wrong in the best way imaginable. With an infinite barrage of suspending grenades and Strand dives, it is literally impossible for any enemy to shoot or even move. Even champions and mini-bosses in the highest level content can't play the game for even a single second. If you thought the crowd control of stasis was good, this Strand build will show you what true crowd control really looks like. So how does it work? I'm glad you asked. But before I tell you, I have to briefly ask that the 67% of you not yet subscribed at least consider hitting that button down below so you can stay up to date on the best builds in Destiny. This build all revolves around the Suspend debuff, applicable to any non-boss enemy that will hold them in the air for 8 seconds, preventing them from fighting or moving and exposing them to easy precision hits. There are 2 ways that we can suspend targets, while the rest of our kit will revolve around energy refund to continuously fuel those 2 suspension methods. The first is the Ensnaring Slam aspect, which allows you to press the air move button to execute a dive, consuming your class ability and suspending all enemies in a large radius around you upon landing. Our second suspension method is our grenade ability, the Shackle Grenade, which when thrown will suspend the first enemy hit along with any other enemies nearby. And although our cooldown methods for our grenade aren't nearly as potent or plentiful as they are for our dive, the Shackle Grenade has an absurd amount of range, making it great for suspending high-threat targets to then allow you to safely go in and lock up lesser threats with the dive. And to further increase our number of suspension methods, our second aspect, Widow's Silk, will grant us a second charge of this Shackle Grenade. And if that wasn't enough, our exotic armor piece for this build, the 6th Coyote, will grant us a second dodge charge, which can of course be used for suspending Strand dives. But while I was crafting this build live on my stream, twitch.tv/Mactics by the way, I had a ton of people come in swearing that Radiant Dance Machines were the superior exotic option for this build. For those who don't know, these boots grant 6 seconds of infinite dodging, or in our case, infinite air move suspension usage, after using your regular dodge near an enemy. The argument here is that this grants you a brief period to roam the battlefield and suspend everything with infinite dives. And while that sounds incredibly strong on paper, in practice, you'll find that when you account for the time it takes to move between groups of enemies, you can only get 2 dives off within this 6-second buff period anyway, the same amount that 6th Coyote has at all times. Now, sure, you could spam 3 dives in place, but at that point you are simply suspending already suspended targets. And mods that grant ability energy on class ability activation don't even proc when using the dive, making the argument of spamming your dive to proc things like Bomber to refund grenade energy invalid. The only way to effectively traverse the field to dive more than 2 sets of enemies is to take the Grapple Grenade. However, even in that instance, you are trading 2 suspending abilities in your Shackle Grenades for 1 additional suspending dive that must be used within 6 seconds of the other 2. The 6th Coyote is just significantly more reliable and practical for this build. But if you won't take my word for it, I'd highly encourage you to simply try both exotics for an hour and determine for yourself which one feels better. For the purposes of this build video, however, I will be wholeheartedly recommending the 6th Coyote, meaning that in total, you have 4 abilities that can suspend targets at all times, allowing you to completely tangle up entire battlefields at the snap of a finger, or, with each instance of suspend lasting 8 seconds, lock up any non-boss target in the entire game for over half a minute. And not only do our fragments increase these durations, but they also grant unbelievable amounts of damage resistance and ability regeneration to both of our suspending abilities. We'll of course want the Thread of Mind for class ability refund when defeating suspended targets, Thread of Generation for grenade refund when dealing damage, Thread of Warding to receive Woven Mail, a 10-second 60% damage resistance buff on Orb of Power pickup, and Thread of Continuity to increase the duration of all Strand debuffs, such as Suspend, by 50%. As for the mod setup for this build, unfortunately, consuming your class ability for the Strand dive does not count as actually using the class ability, and will therefore not proc mods like Bomber, Distribution, and although it's currently disabled and therefore can't be tested, Reaper, I'm told, also falls into this category. Whether this is a bug that will be fixed at a later date, or is the actual intended behavior of these mods, I'm unsure. But if Bungie does tweak them to work with Strand Dive at a later date, be sure to then find room for a copy of Reaper in the class item. Regardless, there is still a fantastic mod setup to be had that will further buff our ability regeneration and weapon damage. We'll begin with a Siphon mod on the helmet, matching the element of your primary weapon for Orb of Power generation on weapon multi-kills. In a similar vein, we'll also want 2 copies of the matching weapon Surge mod for a 17% weapon damage buff while armor charged from Orb pickup. And to extend our base armor charge stack duration from 10 seconds, we'll slot 2 copies of Time Dilation on the class item to bump that up to 18 seconds. To further our grenade cooldown capabilities, we'll also throw 2 copies of Impact Induction onto our gloves for significant grenade energy refund when dealing melee or melee ability damage. You'll then want to occupy the 3rd slot of your gloves with Focusing Strike to receive a chunk of class ability energy refund when dealing that same melee or melee ability damage. We can then round things out with Resists and Reserves on the chest, Finders and Scouts or Powerful Friends on the helmet, and stat mods everywhere. Although, aside from maxing resilience, your stats on this build aren't particularly important, so throw extra points in whatever category works for you. And in the description, you can find a conveniently placed Destiny Item Manager link to copy this entire build over to your Guardian with just 1 click. After which you can also consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons, because what reason do you have not to hit them, right? Now, how this build works in practice is quite simple. You have your Strand dives to suspend enemies at close range, and your Shackle grenades to suspend enemies more safely from far away. Ideally, you want to use a dive over a Shackle grenade if possible, since the class ability energy refund from Thread of Mind for defeating suspended targets is much more significant than that of the grenade energy refund from Thread of Generation. That being said, playing your life is always the #1 priority in Destiny, so even if you have both dive charges available, don't ignore the option to open with your Shackle grenade against a dangerous target or a large group of enemies that can quickly kill you. With the Impact Induction and Focusing Strike mods, you also have a free chunk of grenade and class ability energy refresh available every 7 seconds from melee or melee ability damage whenever needed. Another key priority is of course to be constantly scavenging your Siphon generated Orbs of Power to fuel your 17% weapon damage buff thanks to your Surge Boost mods, and to maintain your 60% damage resistance woven mail buff thanks to the Thread of Warding. And if you are looking for more super strong Destiny builds like my upcoming Strand Titan, subscribing to the channel guarantees that you won't miss it. I hope you enjoyed today's build viewing experience and equally enjoy using it in game. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a great day.